in many ways, they'll be asked to do this in the world of work and perhaps higher education, as much as they'll be asked to write effectively. And with the new syllabus, it's actually even more important. There are 3 big changes to the team project, which are summarised here for 2023. First, AO3 communication is assessed more. It was 28% of the total, it's now 35%. If you look at the presentation, in fact, what's going to be focused on nearly 50% of the assessment is communication in the presentation. So communication is just really more important. To support that, but also to support the team project's focus on sources and being able to identify and evaluate sources in more detail in a way that's a bit more similar to the essay, it gets longer. So they're going to have to actually produce 10 minutes of talk rather than just 8. Well, that's going to be their maximum. They'd have to go up to it, but they're going to be given more space. And another key change is that whereas now we're just asking for live performances of them, what they are going to have in 2023 is a choice. They can either stand up, present live, or they can produce a constructed presentation. And by that I mean they can record their voice, put it over slides, put it over a poster, and they can edit it, they can put it together, and they can submit that recording if they like as well, which might have some practical benefits as well in the classroom, particularly if we've got lots of students. But it also just gives some more opportunities to think about different ways in which we can communicate. When you're thinking about those skills of effective communication, in many ways they're the same as the skills for writing. We're just thinking about how might that look when you're speaking. So when you're planning it with them, get them to think about the structure. A good presentation is going to be made at the beginning, where they introduce the topic and talk about a body where they develop their ideas, and an ending. They're going to organise, introduce and summarise their argument. The beginning might be shorter than an essay. The conclusion will certainly be shorter than an essay, but they still need to have, I think, that 3-part structure. And within that structure, they need to signpost it. And they need to signpost it maybe even more intensely. As I said, as I'm about to say, just repeating that point, coming back to what I was going to say, because as you're experiencing right now, you don't have a script to refer back to. You can't read this later, although we are recording it. So the speaker, when you're actually giving a presentation, needs to be much more attuned to that. You need to take your audience with them, remind them where you're going, where you've been, where you're heading to. Repeat those key ideas as well. That's really important. It's also important to support your argument visually, and that's something that students can do in a number of different ways, and we want to actually develop that skill and reward that skill as they produce their presentation. They might do it through patterns of regularity, consistent typography, other visual elements. You'll see from this presentation that Cambridge University Press have really kindly given me a template with a consistent colour scheme, logo in the top left, and I work within that, and that helps me to make each slide consistent, to have the title in a regular place, to have a regular typeface so you know what each bit of the slide is, and you can recognise those elements as you move from slide to slide. Get your students to find their own ways of doing that. Don't make it overcomplicated, but think about how you give them examples of working to a template or creating a template. Secondly, the answer isn't always a slide. We'll use PowerPoint or other presentation software with slides, but they can do an academic poster, like that first image there. Or if they're presenting live, they can use an object, hold it up and explore it. So slides may be the answer for them, but not always the answer. And bold images can very effectively replace words. And don't be afraid to talk over an image, to have an image with a keyword, and to use that image to talk about how that image supports their argument. is a really valuable thing to do. Third and final element is just to think about the language of speech. How does my language work differently if I'm speaking than if I'm writing? And you can actually teach that, you can be explicit about that with your students. In effective essays, we might use complex sentences with subordinate clauses to build in different ideas. When we're speaking, simple sentences are almost always the way to go. Or if we're going to join together ideas, compound them with and or but. Don't use lots of complex sentences. Keep it simple. Directly address your audience. Think about how you're going to do things. Use that you word to engage them, and just using language in that way, using a particular choice of word is really helpful. Think about a variety of sentence functions. Don't just have to describe your argument. Ask your audience a question, even if they're not there in the room, and it's a constructive presentation, because that helps you to organise your ideas. If you're showing an image, say, look at the top right there, as you can see in this diagram, if you look at that bit. So you can actually direct your audience as well and vary those sentence functions. And then build rhetorical patterns. Use patterns of three. Use a controlled hyperbole. Use repetition. Use contrast to help you structure your ideas and plan that in your scripting. And you can actually talk about those language skills, show them examples, and get them to practice it. The final thing that I want to look at is just that bigger picture of the course as a whole. How we're taking students on this journey, where we're being quite directive at the start, teaching them about what is an argument made up of, how do I evaluate evidence, to getting them to practice those skills and then use them independently and just check how they're doing it themselves and help them as a support to get better at it.